Hello to the wonderful audience of Sci-fi stories. Our channel has recently been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without the budget to keep operating and paying our hardworking staff. If you enjoy today's story and want to hear more, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our team can survive, pay for their daily needs, and continue creating these universes for you. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment below. The machine did not carve into flesh. It dissected the soul. Kason Bogue screamed without parting his lips as the alien device plunged into the darkest abysses of his mind, peeling away his sanity. Yet, at the core of his silent torment, a chillingly beautiful presence breached the dark. A voice of shattering crystal pierced the shadows, carrying a terrifying paradox. The tyrant, overseeing his destruction, was offering him her heart. The air in the subterranean cell of the Ethelgard Maximum Security Penitentiary tasted of oxidized copper and absolute despair. The walls, forged from seamless dark matter alloys, seemed to press inward, crushing the concept of space. Strapped to the interrogation monolith was Kason Bogue. Once a decorated fighter pilot for the Earth Defense Fleet, he was now a disgraced prisoner of the galaxy's most ruthless empire. He had willingly surrendered, taking sole responsibility for the destruction of the sacred Ethelgardian energy spire. It was an act of sabotage he committed to halt an impending war between the two species, a desperate bid to save billions that condemned him to the dreaded mind osmosis. Standing beyond the shimmering blue of the containment field was Queen Zelia of Ethelgard. She was a being of terrifying elegance, her biology rooted in complex silicon structures. Her skin was a breathtaking tapestry of translucent facets that pulsed with a cold, crystalline luminescence. She was ice and absolute authority incarnate. As the supreme ruler, she had bypassed the wardens to personally oversee Kason's punishment. Her objective was cold and calculated. She needed to break his mind, sift through the ashes of his psyche, and extract the names of any accomplices involved in the destruction of the spire. The mind osmosis was not designed to inflict blunt physical trauma. It was far more insidious. It was an ethereal drill that spiraled into the subconscious, violently peeling back fragile layers of memory and forcing the victim to relive their most profound terrors. Cold tendrils of psychic energy wormed into Kason's brain, threatening to drown him in his own manufactured dread, to keep his identity from shattering. Kason fought back with his sheer willpower. He built a frantic fortress of sound and color within his mind. He flooded his thoughts with the raw energy of earth jazz, letting the imaginary wail of a brass saxophone push back the alien cold. He painted the walls of his mental sanctuary with the bleeding oranges and bruised purples of an earth sunset, anchoring his sanity to the warmth of a home he might never see again. Outside the containment field, Queen Zelia watched the holographic monitor, displaying the fluctuating waves of his consciousness. Her crystalline eyes narrowed in fascination. The machine was engineered to reduce any organic being to an empty shell within minutes. Yet, this fragile human was holding the darkness at bay. The visual echoes spilling from his mind were unlike anything in her rigid, hyper-logical world. The chaotic rhythm of the music and the agonizing beauty of the fiery sky defied Ethelgardian comprehension. Driven by a sudden, dangerous hunger to experience this alien warmth directly, Zelia made a forbidden choice. She ordered the machine into standby. Closing her glowing eyes, she extended her own immense consciousness, slipping past the digital firewalls of the monolith, and secretly tethered her mind directly to his. The collision of their minds was instantaneous and violent. Inside the boundless mindscape, the stark, geometric perfection of Zelia's crystalline consciousness crashed into the messy, vibrant canvas of Kason's sunset. For the first time in her centuries of existence, the Silicon Queen felt genuine heat. The jazz rhythm pulsed through her rigid form like a frantic heartbeat she never knew she lacked. And the warm colors washed away the perpetual chill of her royal existence. She felt his profound isolation, his fierce loyalty, and the suffocating agony the machine had left behind, overwhelmed by the raw humanity of his soul. Her emotional dams broke. In the center of his swirling torment, she transmitted a direct thought into his head. "During my punishment," the alien queen whispered, "if you were free, I would choose you." The shock of the impossible transmission violently severed the telepathic connection. Kaysan gasped for air, his physical body arching hard against the restraints as he snapped back to the freezing reality of the prison cell. Cold sweat stung his eyes as he stared through the containment field. Zelia stood exactly where she had been, her expression as unreadable and perfect as a diamond statue. But Kaysan saw the profound truth hidden beneath the cold luminescence of her skin. The terrifying monarch of the Ethelgard Empire was a captive just like him. She was imprisoned by ancient royal doctrines, bound tightly by the suffocating logic of her people, and entirely alone in a galaxy of stars. The mind torture had meant to reveal his secrets, but the forbidden connection had exposed hers. The ruthless queen was silently screaming for rescue, and Kaysan Bogue realized he was the only living soul who had heard her. For 48 hours, Kaysan Bogue existed in a state of agonizing uncertainty, swallowed by the crushing shadows of his confinement. He paced the exact perimeter of his cell, a suffocating space measuring barely 4 by 6 paces, desperately trying to convince himself that the crystalline voice had been nothing more than a cruel side effect of the interrogation. The human mind could conjure desperate fantasies when subjected to systematic destruction. Yet, when the heavy magnetic locks disengaged for his next scheduled cycle of torment, the absolute stillness of his dark reality shifted. Queen Zelia entered the subterranean chamber, flanked by the towering guards of the Supreme Court. Her face was an expressionless mask of silicon perfection, betraying absolutely nothing to the wardens around her. But as the containment field hummed to life, filling the air with the taste of oxidized copper, Kaysan noticed a subtle, impossible anomaly. The microscopic, bioluminescent nodes woven deeply into the collar of her royal cloak began to pulse. It was not a random discharge of energy. It was a rhythmic sequence, an archaic tactical earth code flashing in rapid, deliberate succession. The lights spelled out a single command: listen. Instantly, the oppressive, metal-clad walls of the cell fell away from Kaysan's internal perception. The secret telepathic frequency snapped into place, securely bridging the terrifying void between them. In the waking world, they remained perfectly still, separated by impenetrable energy shields and the watchful eyes of the alien executioners. Within the vast, unseen architecture of their linked minds, however, the stifling physical imprisonment shattered, replaced by an intoxicating, boundless freedom. "You thought I was an illusion," Zelia's voice echoed in the warmth of his consciousness, stripping away her regal coldness to reveal a profound vulnerability. "I thought my brain was finally melting into the floor," Kaysan replied mentally, his thoughts vibrating with a dizzying mixture of relief and disbelief. "Why are you taking this massive risk? If the Supreme Court catches you interfacing with a condemned human, they will destroy you." "The Supreme Court is nothing but a theatrical display," she countered, her telepathic tone laced with a simmering, ancient bitterness. "I am the Queen of Ethelgard in title alone. This crown is a gilded cage. Kaysan, true authority rests entirely in the hands of the Primarch Council. They are the architects of this impending conflict. They do not care about the sanctity of the destroyed energy spire. They care only about the vast, untapped mineral reserves buried beneath Earth's crust. My empire is starving for resources, and those counselors have been searching for the perfect excuse to devour your world. The heavy revelation hung in the telepathic space between them, thick with looming dread. For the next several cycles, the dark, claustrophobic reality of Kasan's physical confinement was sharply juxtaposed against the brilliant, infinite canvas of their mental sanctuary. Under the very noses of her treacherous counsel, they conversed in total secrecy. Kasan painted vivid mental tapestries of humanity for her, desperate to show her the universe beyond her strict programming. He shared the concept of free will, a wild notion entirely foreign to a society governed by rigid, pre-calculated algorithms. He showed her the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of a bustling human city in the rain, the irrationality of loud music, and the profound, aching depth of human compassion. With every shared memory, the cold, logical ideology that had governed Zilia's existence began to silently fracture. He could feel the exact moment her crystalline barriers crumbled, replaced by a sweeping tide of raw, uncharted emotion. The icy monarch was learning how to feel, and the intensity of her awakening terrified and captivated them both equally. However, the sanctuary of their shared minds was not immune to the violent shadows of the real world. During one particularly intense session of mental synchronization, Zilia's fierce concentration slipped. In her eagerness to absorb his memories of the ocean, she inadvertently dropped the firewall guarding her own recent investigative logs. A massive flood of raw, classified data rushed straight into Kasan's mind. The transition was violent and disorienting. He was suddenly standing in the reconstructed memory of the Energy Spire's wreckage, viewing the glowing forensic evidence through Zilia's eyes. What he saw made his blood run absolute cold. The energy signatures left at the blast site did not belong to radical Ethelgardian extremists. They were entirely human. More specifically, they bore the encrypted quantum footprint of Earth intelligence. "No," Kasan whispered out loud in the sterile cell, his physical voice cracking the heavy silence. In the mental link, Zilia realized her catastrophic mistake and tried to pull the memory back. But Kasan held on with brutal, unforgiving force. He deciphered the communication logs embedded deep in the wreckage. The orders to detonate the sacred alien structure had come directly from Earth's high command. The digital authorization was signed by his former commanding officer. The entire mission, his agonizing guilt, his noble sacrifice to take the blame and prevent a war. It was all an elaborate, meticulously crafted lie. Earth intelligence had orchestrated the devastating terror attack to deliberately provoke Ethelgard, seeking to preemptively wipe out the alien threat while playing the innocent victim to the galactic community. The crushing weight of the betrayal forced Kasan to his knees in the physical world. The alien guards instantly tensed, raising their weapons. But Zilia lifted a single glowing hand to halt them, flawlessly masking her action as a routine adjustment to the interrogation protocol. "We are both entirely expendable," she sent the thought to him, her mental voice shivering with chilling sorrow. "You were a disposable pawn meant to ignite their righteous war, and I am the powerless figurehead meant to authorize our retaliation." They were standing dead center in a blood-soaked chessboard, surrounded by enemies on all sides, completely manipulated by the power-hungry leaders of both their civilizations. The horrifying realization forged an unbreakable, desperate alliance between them in the dark. There was no one left to trust, neither human nor Ethelgardian. "If we are going to die, we will not die as their obedient puppets." Kasan projected his resolve, his spirit burning with a newly ignited, violent fury. "You will not die," Zilia replied, her telepathic voice hardening into something unimaginably sharp and dangerous. Beneath the heavy, ceremonial folds of her cloak, her fingers moved with blinding speed across a concealed, biometric terminal. She bypassed the prison's central mainframe, writing a rogue string of code directly into the facility's DNA registry. She took Kaysen's biological signature and masked it, integrating it seamlessly into the master security protocols. In a matter of seconds, Kaysen Bogue ceased to be a prisoner in the system's eyes, without a single alarm sounding. She had granted him complete, unrestricted access to the magnetic doors and the defense grid. He was no longer confined by the metal and the dark. He had become a phantom, an invisible ghost lurking within the walls of the galaxy's most impenetrable fortress, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. The prison's absolute silence shattered exactly at 0200 hours. Blaring klaxons screamed through the subterranean levels as heavy breach charges blew the western airlocks completely open. Through the phantom access code layered securely into his optic nerve, Kaysen tapped directly into the internal security feeds of the maximum security facility. 6 shadows moved with lethal, terrifying precision through the lower maintenance shafts. They were Earth Special Operations. Kaysen recognized the aggressive tactical formation instantly, his heart hammering against his ribs. To the oblivious alien guards scrambling to secure the perimeter, it looked exactly like a desperate, heavily armed extraction mission. It appeared to be a heroic rescue operation mounted to retrieve their fallen, disgraced pilot. But Kaysen meticulously analyzed their equipment through the grainy camera feeds, and a cold dread washed over him. The strike team carried absolutely no medical trauma kits. There were no portable extraction harnesses, no localized shield generators to protect a high-value target, and no biological containment suits for a safe transport. Instead, the heavy, reinforced packs strapped tightly to their backs emitted a highly specific, faint radiation signature that made his blood run entirely cold. They were carrying miniature quantum nuclear devices. "They are not here to rescue me," Kaysen broadcasted through their secret telepathic channel, his mind racing with terrifying speed. "Zilia, you have to lock down the throne room immediately. The strike team is bypassing the detention block entirely. They are heading straight for the upper royal sanctum, and they brought quantum explosives. It is a targeted decapitation strike. Earth intelligence wants you dead. They are going to leave my corpse right next to yours to prove to the galaxy that I was the one who detonated the blast. The Primarch Council will have their perfect martyr, and Earth will have its perfect, unforgivable villain." Zilia's voice echoed back in his head. Her tone was chillingly calm, yet vibrating with the intense realization of their mutual doom. "I am sealing the primary blast doors to the sanctum now. But if they possess high-level military bypass codes, the titanium bulkheads will not hold them for more than 4 minutes. Kaysen did not hesitate for a single second. Instead of running toward the escape bays to reunite with his own kind, he swiped his hand violently over his cell's internal release panel. The rogue biometric code Zilia had written into the system worked flawlessly. The heavy magnetic locks disengaged with a solid, echoing thud. He sprinted out into the flashing red corridors of the prison, moving with desperate speed in the exact opposite direction of freedom. He was actively hunting his own people to protect the queen of the enemy empire. The royal corridor leading to the high throne was a grand, vaulted hall constructed of polished obsidian and gold, now heavily stained with the thick gray smoke of breached barricades. The human strike team was exactly 60 meters from the throne room doors, rapidly setting the quantum charges against the heavy locks. Kaysen hit them aggressively from behind, moving silently like a phantom in the chaotic smoke. He tackled the rear guard with brutal efficiency, snapping the soldier's wrist and commandeering his heavy plasma rifle in one seamless, violent motion. "Kaysen, I have successfully tapped into the corridor's localized gravity grid." Zilia's voice surged powerfully in his mind, sharp and fiercely commanding. She was sitting rigidly on the high throne, just beyond the doors. Her crystalline fingers flying rapidly across the hidden command consoles, integrated into the armrests. Tell me exactly when to strike. The remaining 5 human operatives spun around instantly, their weapons raised and tracking the new threat. They were visibly shocked to see their supposed rescue target actively firing live rounds upon them. Blinding blue plasma bolts seared the air, turning the Grand Hall into a deadly, chaotic crossfire. The air pressure dropped drastically as the plasma burned the oxygen. Kason dove hard behind a shattered marble pillar, feeling the intense heat of a near miss scorch his shoulder. "Drop the floor on Sector 4, right now," Kason yelled telepathically, trusting her completely. Instantly, the artificial gravity plating beneath 3 of the operatives aggressively inverted. The soldiers screamed in terror as they were violently ripped upward, crashing heavily against the vaulted ceiling 30 feet above. The sudden shift completely broke their tactical formation. Kason broke cover, sliding swiftly across the highly polished floor. He fired precise, non-lethal shots, systematically disabling their armor joints and weapon cooling systems. He relied heavily on his brutal military muscle memory, dismantling the elite squad piece by piece, while Zelia expertly manipulated the physical environment around them. She shifted the gravity violently sideways, pinning the squad leader brutally against the wall just as the man reached desperately for a thermal detonator. Kason finished the intense fight with a heavy, calculated strike to the leader's helmet using the butt of his rifle, dropping the man totally unconscious to the floor. The grand corridor fell dead silent, save for the crackle of localized electrical fires and the groans of the incapacitated soldiers. Kason stood panting heavily, his muscles burning, surrounded by the unconscious bodies of the Earth assassins. He had saved the Queen. He had successfully stopped the nuclear detonation that would have ended billions of lives. But the crushing paranoia of the situation warned him that this victory was nothing more than a fragile, temporary illusion. A slow, highly mocking applause echoed loudly from the far end of the ruined hall. The massive, gilded doors of the throne room hissed open, smoke pouring out. It was not the Queen who stepped forward into the corridor, but the Grand Vizier of Ethelgard. Behind the tall, imposing figure, a squad of heavily armed Supreme Court executioners dragged a physically bound Zelia forward. Her crystalline skin flickered weakly under the suppression cuffs clamped to her wrists. A truly magnificent display of savage human violence, the Grand Vizier sneered, his faceted face contorted in a grotesque, victorious smile. But ultimately, it is utterly pointless. They lied to us. Zelia projected directly into Kason's mind, her telepathic voice trembling violently for the very first time since he had known her. The security bypass codes the human soldiers used to breach the sanctum. The Vizier provided them directly. He allowed them inside. Kason stared at the scene in sheer horror. The ultimate betrayal ran infinitely deeper than anyone had realized. The Ethelgardian Grand Vizier had actively and secretly colluded with Earth intelligence. They had meticulously orchestrated this entire bloodbath together, working across enemy lines to eliminate the Queen, the only real obstacle to their mutual war machine. The Queen has proven herself entirely incapable of defending the high throne against basic human scum, the Vizier announced loudly, his voice echoing perfectly for the automated security recorders hidden in the walls. By the supreme power vested in the Primarch Council, I hereby initiate the deposition protocol. Zelia fought viciously against her massive alien captors, her glowing eyes locking fiercely onto Kason through the smoke. The floor. Kason, you have to move away from the center. Before Kason could even process the warning, the Grand Vizier slammed his armored fist onto the master override console beside the door. The entire throne room defense system was violently disabled. The polished obsidian floor directly beneath Kason and Zelia instantly retracted into the walls. There was no warning alarm, No secondary safety net to catch them. The solid ground simply vanished into thin air. They plummeted together into absolute, suffocating darkness. The air turned freezing cold instantly as they fell rapidly through the internal, forgotten layers of the massive planet. They were plunging straight down into the abyssal ruins, the ancient, restricted sublevels used exclusively to house and contain rogue biomechanical monstrosities. It was a brutal execution pit, perfectly designed to leave no trace of the condemned. As the heavy titanium trapdoors sealed tightly shut high above them, aggressively cutting off the absolute last sliver of light, Kason reached out blindly in the terrifying dark, desperate to catch the falling queen in the endless freefall. The impact with the abyss floor was violently broken by a thick, decaying canopy of synthetic flora. They tumbled downward, crashing into the suffocating, pitch-black heart of the abyssal ruins. The very moment they landed, Zelia violently arched her spine, emitting a soundless scream that echoed painfully inside Kason's mind. The grand telepathic tether that connected her to the Ethel Guardian planetary network was brutally severed by the miles of dense, heavy ore and radiation shielding above them. It was a catastrophic biological shock. To her species, losing the constant hum of the planetary connection was akin to having their lungs ripped directly from their chests. The brilliant, cold luminescence that had always radiated from her elegantly faceted skin began to rapidly dim, fading steadily into a sickly, translucent gray. Her majestic presence was collapsing. She was dying in the suffocating dark, disconnected and utterly alone, for the first time since their minds had violently collided in the interrogation cell. Kason Bogue was the one holding all the power, and his only overriding instinct was to save her. He viciously ripped wide strips of tough fabric from his prison uniform, transforming himself into a desperate combat medic. The brutal fall had caused deep, terrifying structural fractures along her crystalline shoulders and ribs, leaking a viscous, glowing silver fluid that represented her vital life force. Relying heavily on his Earth military survival training, Kason scoured the treacherous cavern floor. His bare hands bled freely as he violently smashed open glowing, dormant power cells from the surrounding mechanical debris. He carefully extracted the raw, unrefined crystalline plasma from the ancient, cracked batteries, working entirely by the dimming, tragic light of her own dying body. He gently packed the glowing, restorative paste deep into her wounds, binding them tightly with his makeshift cloth bandages. His warm, calloused human hands trembled softly against her freezing, jagged alien skin, creating a desperate anchor of physical reality to keep her fading consciousness from drifting away into the void. There was absolutely no time to rest or recover. The sharp, terrifying metallic scrape of heavy mechanical claws suddenly echoed through the cavernous dark. Ancient scavenger drones, monstrous spider-like biomechanical horrors originally designed to violently purge the abyss of any living organic matter, descended rapidly from the jagged stalactites above. Their multiple optical sensors burned a furious, piercing crimson in the shadows. "I cannot fight them," Zelia gasped, her physical voice incredibly weak, stripped entirely of its former telepathic resonance and royal authority. "I only have enough residual energy remaining for a single, concentrated magnetic pulse." Kason did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. "Then make it count," he ordered firmly, pulling a heavy, jagged piece of twisted metal from the surrounding rubble. He sprinted boldly out of the shadows, deliberately drawing the crimson sensors directly away from the fallen queen. He moved with desperate, fluid human agility, vaulting over ruined stone pillars and sliding dangerously beneath razor-sharp mechanical appendages. He acted as perfect, suicidal bait, luring the screeching metallic beasts into an incredibly tight cluster near a dormant geothermal vent. When the entire swarm lunged viciously at him, Zelia pushed herself painfully off the ground, raising her trembling crystalline hand. She unleashed her absolute final reserve of energy, violently manipulating the cavern's natural magnetic core. An invisible, crushing wave of localized gravity slammed brutally into the cluster, crushing the ancient machines into a dense, sparking ball of entirely useless scrap iron. The immediate threat completely neutralized. The heavy, profound silence of the underground tomb returned to surround them. Kason collapsed heavily onto the cold floor beside her, his breath coming in ragged, exhausting gasps. In the profound, isolating darkness of the abyss, every single boundary that had previously separated them was completely and utterly erased. There were absolutely no royal titles, no warring empires, no cruel wardens, and no desperate prisoners. They were just two fading, desperate souls huddling closely together for shared warmth against the crushing, infinite weight of the universe. Zelia leaned her heavy head gently against his human shoulder, an act of unprecedented physical intimacy for a being of her kind. The usually hard, perfectly logical angles of her face softened beautifully. "I know I should be terrified right now," she whispered softly, her physical voice possessing a musical, incredibly haunting quality in the quiet dark. "But for the very first time in my long existence, my mind is completely and entirely my own. There are absolutely no council whispers invading my thoughts, no rigid royal protocols demanding my obedience. If I am to die in this dark, forgotten pit, I will do so proudly as a free individual, not as their manipulated puppet queen. I would gladly choose this ending, Kason, as long as it is sitting right here with you." "We are not dying down here," Kason replied fiercely, wrapping his arms protectively around her shivering form. He forced them both to stand and keep moving, supporting her heavy weight as they navigated blindly deeper into the planetary core, desperately searching for any hidden way out. What they discovered instead was a massive, impossibly vast subterranean chamber that completely defied human comprehension. Resting silently in the exact center of the cavern sat the Apex engine. It was a gargantuan, awe-inspiring ancient relic of the very first Ethelgardian civilization, a colossal machine composed of towering concentric metallic rings and millions of dormant neuroconductors. Kason recognized the archaic, intricate schematics carved deeply into its massive base from the classified tactical files he had intensely studied before his original mission. This was the legendary Truth Engine. It was a forgotten, mythical transmitter, uniquely capable of broadcasting pure, unadulterated thoughts, raw emotions, and visual memories directly into the minds of 100% of the planetary population, entirely bypassing the heavy censorship grids of the corrupt Primarch Council. A reckless, impossibly beautiful plan formed in their linked minds simultaneously. They were not going to search for a cowardly hidden escape route just to live out their remaining days as hunted fugitives. They were going to use the Apex engine to rip the massive veil of lies entirely apart. They would broadcast the absolute, undeniable truth of the orchestrated war, the disgusting betrayal of Earth intelligence, and the rotting corruption of the alien council directly to billions of citizens and soldiers alike. It was the ultimate, unstoppable weapon of peace. But as Kason meticulously examined the ancient control terminal, a crushing, horrifying realization halted his beating heart. The colossal engine was completely and utterly drained of power. To initiate the massive planetary broadcast, the ancient machine strictly required a massive biological battery to jumpstart the complex neural network. It desperately needed a powerful organic mind to fuse directly with its core and burn its own life force to power the monumental transmission. Zelia reached out weakly to touch the console, fully prepared to sacrifice herself. But she was barely clinging to life. Her shattered, flickering energy reserves were barely enough to keep her own heart beating, let alone ignite a machine that demanded the raw, consuming power of a dying star. Far above the suffocating darkness of the planetary core, exactly 200 miles in high orbit, the Earth Defense Armada shifted into a lethal crescent strike formation. The glittering array of human warships armed their massive city, leveling primary railguns, waiting in absolute, terrifying silence for the final authorization to glass the alien homeworld. Down on the surface, safely locked inside their heavily shielded subterranean command bunker, the Primarch Council prepared to execute their horrific endgame. Using the fabricated assassination attempt on their queen as the ultimate political leverage, the Grand Vizier placed his hand hovering directly over the ignition matrix for the planetary defense grid. They were merely seconds away from deploying atmospheric weapons of mass destruction that would utterly annihilate the human fleet and rain catastrophic, burning debris down upon their own sprawling cities. It was a meticulously orchestrated genocide designed solely to cement their absolute, unquestionable power, marking the imminent, violent end of billions of innocent lives across two distinct civilizations. Deep inside the forgotten bowels of the abyssal ruins, the massive apex engine remained entirely dormant, a sleeping metal god demanding a horrific, bloody tribute. Kaysan stared at the colossal, intricate neural cables snaking menacingly from the base of the ancient machine. They were incredibly thick, pulsating with a dormant, hungry energy, and tipped with jagged, serrated sensory needles designed to interface directly with a reinforced Ethelgardian biomechanical core. He looked back at Zilia. Her beautiful crystalline body was completely depleted, her internal light flickering terribly like a dying candle caught in a violent hurricane. She had absolutely nothing left to give, her life force draining rapidly into the cold, stone floor. Kaysan made the only choice a true soldier could make when the final line was definitively drawn. He stepped purposefully toward the heavy metallic altar and viciously tore away the ruined remains of his prison uniform, exposing the bare, battered skin of his back to the freezing cavern air. He grabbed the primary conductive cables with both trembling hands. They were freezing cold and unnervingly heavy, humming with lethal potential. With a feral, guttural shout that echoed loudly into the vast dark, Kaysan slammed the jagged interface needles directly into the base of his own human spine. The physical agony was immediate, absolute, and far beyond the realm of any previously known torture. The brutal, unforgiving insertion violently shattered his lower vertebrae, forcefully fusing volatile alien silicon tech with fragile human bone, hot blood, and sensitive marrow. He threw his head back, letting out a raw, blood-curdling scream that violently tore his vocal cords to absolute shreds. He was forcefully turning his own fragile central nervous system into a living, breathing, burning power conduit. "No!" Zilia shrieked, her physical voice breaking into a desperate, agonizing sob that shattered the heavy silence. She dragged her broken, heavy body across the cold stone floor, her glowing, translucent hands reaching out uselessly to pull the heavy cables from his bleeding back. "Stop it right now. The raw, unfiltered voltage will completely incinerate your brain. You are going to burn alive from the inside out." Kaysan fell heavily to his knees, his muscles seizing violently as the colossal machine began to draw hungrily directly from his pulsing life force. Thick, dark blood poured heavily from his nose and mouth, staining the ancient metal floor a deep, horrifying crimson. Despite the catastrophic, overwhelming pain ripping his body entirely apart on a cellular level, he forced his trembling head up and looked directly into her terrified, weeping eyes. He offered her a broken, incredibly bloody smile that carried the profound weight of absolute devotion. "This is the exact only way you ever get to be completely free," he gasped, his human voice a wet, ragged, Horrifying rasp. Just like you promised me in the dark. The Apex engine fully ignited, with a terrifying, world-shattering boom. A blinding, roaring hurricane of alien electricity violently surged through the thick cables and exploded straight up his human spinal column. The raw, unfiltered current viciously assaulted his consciousness, threatening to instantly vaporize his sanity into fine ash. His vision went entirely, blindingly white. To survive the mind-rending, apocalyptic voltage, Kaysan furiously built the exact same mental fortress he had used to survive the brutal interrogation chair. He forced his boiling, melting brain to clearly hear the chaotic, triumphant wail of a brass earth jazz trumpet. He painted the inside of his burning skull with the bleeding oranges and bruised purples of a beautiful, peaceful earth sunset. While his physical body literally cooked from the inside out, his desperate mind fiercely clung to the beautiful, chaotic warmth of human memory, using the profound, simple beauty of the setting sun as an unbreakable, defiant anchor against the raging electrical storm threatening to erase his entire existence. Above them, the massive, towering concentric rings of the ancient engine began to spin wildly, generating a deafening, sonic roar that violently shook the very foundations of the heavy planet. The colossal power meter built seamlessly into the central control console rapidly climbed upward, 80%, 90%. It was actually working. The incredibly fragile human battery was miraculously holding together just long enough to charge the massive planetary transmitter. When the archaic, glowing gauge hit exactly 99%, a catastrophic, earth-shattering explosion violently blew apart the heavy, sealed entrance of the cavern. The ancient, impenetrable rock walls completely caved in, raining massive, crushing boulders down into the dark subterranean lake. Through the swirling, choking dust and heavy falling debris, the towering, heavily armored Primarch General marched aggressively into the sacred chamber, perfectly flanked by an elite, remorseless squad of royal shock troopers. They had efficiently tracked the massive, unprecedented energy spike from the surface down into the abyss. Their heavy, lethal plasma cannons were fully charged, aimed directly at the spinning engine and the two dying, desperate targets tethered to its base. They desperately needed just one more single minute to initialize the massive broadcast. Exactly 60 seconds of agonizing life, driven entirely by a terrifying, a primal surge of raw adrenaline and pure, unadulterated human willpower. Kaysan violently forced his broken body to stand upright. The incredibly thick power cables remained deeply, painfully embedded in his bleeding spine, creating a horrifying, restrictive bloody tether that severely limited his combat radius. He roared loudly, like a cornered feral beast, and threw his battered, bleeding body directly into the path of the advancing, heavily armed alien soldiers. He was completely, hopelessly unarmed, bleeding profusely from every single orifice, and fighting blindly against highly trained, towering killers clad head to toe in heavy tactical armor. The first towering alien warrior lunged viciously forward with a crackling, lethal energy pike. Kaysan ducked sharply under the lethal thrust, moving with a terrifying, suicidal, desperate speed, and drove his bare, heavily bloodied fist directly into the vulnerable, soft joints of the alien's knee armor. The thick bone snapped loudly with a sickening, echoing crunch. The second imposing soldier instantly brought the heavy, solid butt of his plasma rifle down violently across Kaysan's jaw, instantly shattering the bone and sending him crashing incredibly hard into the unforgiving dirt. But Kaysan absolutely refused to stay down and die. He spat out a thick mouthful of shattered human teeth and hot blood, grabbing the massive guard's heavy ankle and violently pulling the giant crashing to the ground. Kaysan viciously gouged directly at the glowing optic sensors of the alien combat helmet with his bare, broken thumbs. He was willingly trading pieces of his own fragile flesh, breaking his own knuckles and ribs, desperately buying crucial bloody seconds with his own agonizing, slow destruction. "Do it right now!" Kaysan screamed wildly, taking a devastating, heavy armored kick directly to the ribs that completely and instantly collapsed his left lung. Seeing the fragile human man she loved being brutally beaten to death, simply to buy her precious time, Zelia miraculously found a hidden, impossible reserve of strength, born entirely from pure, uncharted, human-adjacent rage. She desperately dragged herself up the steep steps of the grand altar, her glowing hands shaking violently with absolute fury. With Kaysan's bright red blood splattered heavily across the floor behind her, Zelia violently plunged her glowing crystalline fingers directly into the fully charged, unlocked central interface, forcefully syncing her expansive mind with the ancient machine to unleash the hidden, explosive truth upon the entire, waiting galaxy. A heavy plasma strike finally caught Kaysan directly in the chest. He collapsed instantly, his broken body hitting the ancient stone floor with a hollow thud. The brutalized human battery was completely spent, but his agonizing sacrifice had purchased exactly enough time. The Apex engine roared to absolute, terrifying life. Zelia thrust her glowing hands deep into the central interface. She did not merely connect her own mind to the massive machine. She reached out into the blinding digital storm and grabbed tightly onto Kaysan's fading consciousness, weaving his dying soul intimately with her own. Together, they became the epicenter of a psychic shockwave of unprecedented magnitude. A blinding pillar of pure telepathic energy erupted from the planetary core, violently piercing the heavy layers of rock, steel, and atmospheric shielding. Across the sprawling, geometric continents of Ethelgard, billions of citizens stopped completely in their tracks. The mundane hum of their heavily regulated daily lives was instantly overridden. Instead of receiving the usual cold, sterile political directives from the Primarch Council, they experienced a total sensory and emotional overload. They were directly injected with the absolute truth. They clearly saw the classified forensic logs proving Earth intelligence staged the terror attack. They witnessed the disgusting, cowardly meetings of the corrupt alien counselors, trading millions of lives for mere resources. But far more profoundly, they felt the raw, unfiltered humanity of Kaysan Bogue. They felt the soothing rhythm of Earth jazz, the breathtaking warmth of a distant sunset, and the pure, overwhelming love of a man willing to be beaten to death to save a queen who was meant to be his executioner. The profound emotional transfer acted like a beautiful, unstoppable virus of sudden enlightenment. High above, in the cold vacuum of space, the Ethelgardian orbital fleet was mere seconds away from unleashing catastrophic fire. As the telepathic wave washed over the bridge of every single warship, alien commanders fell to their knees, weeping crystal tears as they experienced human empathy for the very first time. They simultaneously defied the screaming orders of the Primarch Council. Massive railguns powered down entirely, in a unified, magnificent display of defiance. The alien armada illuminated the dark void by projecting massive, brilliant beams of blue peace light directly toward the human fleet, simultaneously, aboard the Earth vessels. Command consoles lit up with heavily encrypted data packets Kaysan had secretly scheduled to broadcast from the prison's mainframe before his escape. The human soldiers stared in utter horror as their own high commanders were definitively exposed as war criminals. Deep inside the heavily fortified subterranean bunker, the Grand Vizier screamed frantically at his communication panels, demanding immediate planetary bombardment. His orders fell on deaf ears. The elite royal guards stationed to protect him slowly lowered their weapons, their eyes glowing with the transferred memories of Kaysan's brutal sacrifice. Without a single word spoken, they advanced on the treacherous counselors, binding them in heavy suppression cuffs for high treason. Through the planetary network, Queen Zilia's voice resonated with absolute, undeniable authority, declaring an immediate and total ceasefire across all sectors. The violent storm finally passed. Inside the ruined cavern of the abyss, the colossal engine slowly spun down into a quiet hum. The battle was won, but the cost lay perfectly still on the blood-soaked floor. Zilia rushed to Kaysun, gently cradling his broken, entirely motionless body against her chest. His heart had stopped beating. The raw voltage had completely ravaged his fragile human nervous system. She pressed her face against his cold cheek, tapping into the most ancient, sacred power of her royal lineage. She initiated the crystal tears. It was a forbidden biological transfer that required her to willingly surrender her own silicon-based immortality. She wept glowing, liquid silver directly onto his fatal wounds. The concentrated, pure life energy seeped deeply into his broken flesh, miraculously stitching his torn veins back together, violently restarting his heart, and rebuilding his burned nervous system cell by fragile cell. She poured her entire eternal future into his mortal shell, choosing a fleeting life of love over an eternity of cold solitude. Exactly 1 year later, the grand central square of Ethelgard was completely unrecognizable. There were no towering energy spires of war, no restrictive barriers, and no fearful divisions. Human diplomats and Ethelgardian citizens walked side by side under the sprawling, crystalline arches. Standing high on the grand balcony overlooking the peaceful unification was Kaysun Bogue. He was no longer a condemned prisoner, bearing the weight of a fabricated crime. He wore the elegant, flowing garments of a royal consort, his posture strong and entirely healed. Beside him stood Queen Zilia, her skin now radiating a warm, golden hue that perfectly mirrored the human sun. As the sky above them shifted into a breathtaking, vibrant red twilight, an entirely new sunset they had fought and bled to create. Kaysun reached out and gently took her hand. The roaring cheers of two united species echoed wonderfully around them. Zilia leaned in close, resting her head against his shoulder, her eyes reflecting the beautiful sky. She smiled softly and whispered, "Now you are free, and I have chosen you." Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for tuning in to Sci-fi Stories today. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story thrilling and want to help our channel survive our recent demonetization, please consider supporting us with just $1. Your kindness helps us pay our hardworking staff so they can feed their families and continue bringing you these incredible universes. You can easily donate by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or by clicking the donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for keeping the magic of storytelling alive.